A big thank you to all of my listeners. And if you would like to support this transmission even more and boost your trading account, go to trendfollowing.com/now. And without any further delay, on to today's show. This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I've got a book in front of me. It's called Play Bigger: How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. It's authored by 4 guys: Al Ramadan, Dave Peterson, Christopher Lochhead, and Kevin Maney. Buy this book. I'm not getting paid a damn thing. Buy this book. Now, maybe somebody's going to write me and say, Michael, you're stupid. This book is not very good. I'm going to come back and argue and say that you might be mentally challenged. If this book, Play Bigger, doesn't give you multiple aha moments on how to look at marketing today, you're crazy. You're 100% crazy. My guest today is one of the 4 authors of Play Bigger, Christopher Lochhead. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. I'm very lucky to have Chris on my show today. You're West Coast right now?
Yeah, I'm in Santa Cruz, California.
Okay, I'm in Saigon, Vietnam.
Are you really?
Yes.
Wow, that's outrageous.
Have you ever been?
I have not been to Vietnam. One of the few places of consequence I haven't been. How is it?
It's its own little mini Silicon Valley these days.
How cool!
Yeah, it's worth popping into and visiting. I had a fund manager friend of mine pop in here about a month ago for 3 days, and he's bringing his family back here this month. So it's like, I mean, it's very at least Saigon's very westernized, and you can get around fine.
Oh, buddy of mine did his honeymoon there, and he loved it.
I'd much rather be here than look. I mean, I love Tokyo, I love Singapore, but in terms of comparing Vietnam to Thailand, for Thailand is just a tourist trap. Well, let me get started with you.
Okay, perfect. I'm yours as long as you want. I just poured myself a beer and I'm ready for you.
Okay.
Oh, one question off the top. Is this PG or can I talk like a pirate?
You can say whatever you want to say. I mean, I sometimes do monologues on my podcast and I will drop more F-bombs than I care. And sometimes I beep them, sometimes I don't. It just depends on how I sound. You know, I'll get a few warriors telling me that they like what I say, but why do I use profanity? And then I say, well, listen, I was a baseball catcher for 10 years, not professionally, but into college. And, you know, if you're a baseball catcher, you just learn to cuss all the freaking time.
I was a pirate in another life, and you read our book.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we went with HarperCollins is because they said we could swear in the book.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of publishers, top tier publishers. You say, hey, listen, we're going to be dropping some fucks and some shits in the book, and we're going to throw Microsoft and SAP under the bus and whoever else. And they're like, we don't want to do that. Thanks.
Interesting. So they were literally, when you wanted to talk about particular firms, even in the proposal stage, some publishers are like, we don't want anything to do with you.
It was more the swearing. It was the number one thing was for authors. What the fuck? That's going to be a disaster. So there's no concept that you could write a book the way developers write software, the way a band writes a song. So that was probably the biggest one in terms of people not being interested in us. And then in terms of us being interested in them, our big issue was, were you going to let us write in our own voice?
You know, it's funny about the fuck thing because I remember speaking to a fund manager friend of mine. By the way, I'll do an intro and introduce you in post and clean it all up and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm already recording.
Do you want me to call you Mike or Michael?
Yeah, as long as you're calling me, it's fine.
You don't have a preference?
I've always say it's for whatever reason, guys call me Mike and women call me Michael. And usually I've done something wrong when I hear Michael. So
Excellent.
But no, I remember being in a fund manager friend of mine's office for the first time and recording it, and he must have dropped 500 F-bombs. And it's like, and I'll do the same thing, and it sounds like you do the same thing. It's not that we're trying to do it for effect or whatever. It's just life, it just happens. And I find that some of the highest achievers have a hard time sometimes with with keeping those under control. It doesn't mean we're louts or whatever, but I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, whatever, that's life.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way I talk. I've been a fighter or a scrappy guy. I had paper route from the time I was 9 years old, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a way I express myself. At the beginning of my career, when I was 18, I started my first company. I got told 3 things that I had to do. I had to get an MBA, I had to learn to play golf, and I had to stop swearing. And I just said, fuck you. And I didn't ever do any of those things.
I don't play golf. I still swear, but I did waste my time getting the MBA.
Well, I would have got one, Mike, if I could have, but I got thrown out of school at 18 for being stupid, and nobody would ever have me back. So,
as we were trying to get set up with messing with Skype, I said that your newest work here, Play Bigger, and it makes my life more difficult because it does. Because what you really guys are doing, you're forcing everyone to think outside the box, and most of life is about thinking inside the box.
Yeah, very much. And some of the feedback we got, because in a lot of ways we wrote this book in collaboration with, I don't know the exact number, but many dozens of people in Silicon Valley participated with us in forming the thoughts and concepts and helping with the research and so forth. And that's just something that showed up in these discussions.
I think what's interesting too, and just to paint the picture for people, like we can all look out there and we can see these new things that appear, whether it's Facebook, Google, Uber, you even talk about, like 5 Hour Energy, Pixar, Bird's Eye, frozen foods. There's a commonality here that I don't think most people really dive deep on. And talk about this big picture commonality of all those operations that I just mentioned, because that really is the main thrust. And it's one of those aha moments when you first start to absorb what they were doing and what they were doing different.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. At a high level, here's the aha. Most innovators or entrepreneurs tend to, at a high level, do 2 things. 1, they build what they hope is a legendary product or technology. And 2, they build what they hope is a legendary company and business model to deliver that product and technology. And then they throw it in the world and they go, ta-da, here it is. And when they go to market it, they essentially market features. And they talk about speeds and feeds, and they talk about why it's better, and they scream about all the things that a wonderful carbidingulator can do. And they hope the world figures out the right context for this thing. And it turns out that sometimes that works, but most of the time it doesn't. Less than 2% of technology, venture-backed technology companies are ever worth anything of consequence. Roughly half the Fortune 500 drops off the list every 20 to 25 years. And so the failure rate of new innovation is very high. So when you look at it, we said, okay, well, what do the legendary entrepreneurs and innovators do that's different, to get to your question, Mike? And what we discovered is they do 3 things. They do product design, company design, and this thing that's called category design. And that is, they think about how they're going to create a whole new space, a whole new market category in the world for their innovation to live in. And most importantly, they teach the world to think about the problem and the solution the way they did. And if the world acknowledges the problem, then it's going to want the solution. And so legendary entrepreneurs are as thoughtful and careful about their category as they are about their product and their company. And that's the first big aha.
It really is. And you use the phrase category king. And you give an example. I love this example, and I want you to explain it, get people into your way of thinking. Elvis.
Elvis wasn't just the king of rock and roll, but he was a category king of rock and roll because he is the category designer of rock and roll. And so what he was doing was taking components of different kinds of music and combining them together in a whole new way to create a sound that no one had ever heard before. And in so doing, he created, most people would call it a genre, but in reality, rock and roll was a whole new category. And of course, today there are many subcategories of rock and roll. One of my favorites, for example, the Ramones. They were the category designers of punk rock, which is a subcategory of rock and roll.
I'd argue the Ramones are still their own category.
I would too, Mike.
I mean, seriously, I name me another group that sounds like the Ramones exactly. I mean, Sex Pistols don't sound like the Ramones. Clash doesn't sound like Ramones. The Pixies don't sound like the Ramones. Ramones sound like the Ramones.
Well, and whoever wrote a lyric like "There's no stopping the Cretans from hopping."
Right. But that gets to your big picture point: is they were doing something so radically different. They find this own category, and then once you're in your own category, the defense of it and extending it out and monopolizing it, boy, it opens up a world there. It's a Pandora's box of opportunity, huh?
Yeah, that's exactly right. What we discovered is we did a huge data science research project, both for our work as well as for the book, and we analyzed every venture-backed startup founded in the United States from 2000 through till today. And we asked a question that it turns out we couldn't find anybody else had asked, which was, what percentage of the market cap in the category goes to the category king or the leader? So a lot of people study, of course, market share, which is incredibly important. But we wanted to look at market cap, that is to say the total value of all of the companies in a particular market category. How does that shake out over time? And what we discovered is that on average, the category king in the technology world gets 76% of the available market cap of the entire space. That company has just incredible compounding power over time. And if you're not that company, then you're fighting for plus or minus a quarter of the market cap. And in some categories, it's extreme. Facebook has no competitor. VMware, for all intents and purposes, has no competitor. Some category kings are so dominant, they get even more than 76%.
As we talk about this idea of going for the category king, and so many people are preoccupied with features. I mean, everything's about features. And hell, I mean, I screw this up. We all screw it up. But you really force people with this work to think differently, to think about this category king. Break it down in terms of Silicon Valley. How many people are really in this headspace of where you guys have gone? I mean, how many? I mean, of course, is the top level. I mean, look, a guy got Steve Jobs. He clearly got this, whether he knew it and wrote it down or whether it's just instinctive. Break this apart in terms of who really gets this and how many people don't get it. Try and put some metrics on this so I can wrap my arms around it.
So we don't have an empirical data on that, as you might expect, Mike. But, we talk to over 100 technology startups a year in the course of our work in Silicon Valley, the vast majority of whom are funded by top-tier VCs and, are kind of real players. And so we kind of get a good sense of it. Here's what we know. Category design is kind of a secret black art in Silicon Valley. And so there's probably about 10% of entrepreneurs that understand that you need to do something very different than what most people would call marketing to condition the world to understand and, most importantly, think about your innovation they want to, and think about in specific the problem the way you want them to, and therefore the solution. And if they acknowledge and accept the problem, then they're going to pull the solution out of the company. Category designers, whether they do it explicitly or implicitly, understand that you have to teach the world to accept this new innovation. And if you do, then you get an Uber, then you get a Facebook, then you get a Google, then you get a Salesforce. If you don't, you are leaving the category up to chance. And so the world might figure it out, or they might not, or they might figure it out, but not the way you wanted them to. And so the category you're in is really the tattoo of the company. If you think about your grocery store and you walk into the grocery store, the way the whole grocery store is organized is by category. If you're 5 Hour Energy and you want to be a new category that has a meaningfully higher price point than Monster Energy drink or Gatorade or Coke or coffee or any of those things, then you want to be in a different place. And so they create a whole new category. They called it the energy shot. It's not a drink. It's not a coffee. It's this whole new category. And they dominate that space. That's essentially what a category is. The legends understand this either naturally or they pick it up somewhere along the way, that the company that designs the space is best positioned to dominate the space.
But it's ballsy. It's ballsy to say we need an energy shot when there's a whole 7-Eleven, Circle K filled of other energy drinks. To say we need a warm energy shot that kind of tastes like shit and that people are going to buy it, that takes a lot of cojones to say, man, this is what we really need.
It does take big balls, but here's the interesting thing. If you look in space after space, we know it's true in the technology world because that's the world we come from. But as we've talked to people in other industries, they're telling us that this category king dynamic, this winner-take-all dynamic, is starting to play out in lots of other spaces. So when you begin to understand that, our friend Eddie Yoon, who runs the Cambridge group, their practice in category design, he's written for HBR about how category creation is the ultimate growth strategy. And that's because the first company to design the space is best positioned to win. And so the interesting thing is, if you're launching a company or a product and you're launching it into an existing market, by definition, you're playing somebody else's game. If you're in an industry where this winner-take-all category king dynamic is either the case today or becoming the case rapidly, then when you make a decision to compete in a game created by someone else, you are making a decision to fight for 25% of the economics out of the chute.
You've got a line here that I love that it's a simple line that I pulled from the book. Customers rush to a new category because it makes sense to them. To get to that way of thinking where you can develop a product that fits into this new category and have it make sense to customers, something brand new, that takes, and I mentioned this earlier, that takes such an outside the box thinking. I mean, you can't go through life as a normal character, a normal actor, and get there. If you spend your entire life moving through, as you mentioned, not going to the MBA route, if one spends their entire, they don't teach you that. I remember at my MBA program, one of the first things they were teaching us about how to maximize how many people sit on a fucking airplane. That's not teaching creativity at all.
That's right. And it's interesting you say that. We've had the distinct honor and pleasure of working with Professor Tina Selig at Stanford, and we've begun, we actually just completed the first lecture series on category design. It may sound completely audacious, Mike, but we believe over the next 10 years, many of the top universities in the world are going to teach this. And the reason being, universities teach you how to do innovative things, whether it's create an innovative business model or products or technology. But if you go and create those companies and technologies and you don't know how to make those products and technologies connect with the world, that is to say, find their place, then they're going to fail. Even worse, if you just teach people how to fight for share in an existing space, listen, Coke and Pepsi have been fighting for decades and decades and decades. Pepsi has proven beyond a fucking shadow of a doubt that when you are trying to beat the company that designed the product, the business model, and the category at the outset, you're not going to beat them. Here's another example. Microsoft has spent reportedly, according to Business Insider, over $10 billion on Bing. And they put not even a dent in Google's search business. If Microsoft, one of the best companies of all time, that has an virtually unlimited amount of resources and talent and certainly money, if they can't unseat a category king with $10 billion, what makes you think that you can with however much you're going to spend? And so the point is, yes, it takes big balls to design your own category, but if you don't choose to do that, you're going to go up against an incumbent category king with a we're better strategy, and you're going to be Bing.
What has Microsoft done, though, since putting DOS out and then releasing Windows? They're the operating system guys. But everything else, it's like once they had that cash cow, everything else to me seems uncoordinated, makes little sense, and never works. And they're always playing catch up to everyone else, putting out a Microsoft store in the malls that no one goes to after the Apple store. I mean, it's like time after time after time. Of course, they still make cash, but they've done no new category kings. I look at Google, they pull out YouTube, completely unrelated to their original business. A complete category king, I would say.
Absolutely. And if you look at what Google's doing with Alphabet, turning themselves into a holding company and breaking themselves up into these different focused areas, it's almost as if they've got this thing, if not figured out, they're starting to think about it, because they're allowing the startups within their organization to try to become category kings in their space. But Michael, I want to get back to the Microsoft thing for a second. There's no question that Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Mike Maple Sr. and the original guy, of course, Ballmer, the original guys at Microsoft at the top did a legendary job creating the personal computer category. Of course, the operating system, they shifted to Windows. Microsoft Office was genius, and I can explain why. But the interesting thing is they developed a handful, the operating system in Microsoft Office and maybe Xbox after that, the seminal category king positions. And then they stopped prosecuting the magic triangle: category, company, and product. And they just focused on product. So, for example, Bill Gates launched the tablet PC in 2001. And he stood up and he made the mistake that most innovators make, which is he says, aren't these features cool? And you and I looked at it and said, well, it's kind of a weird looking laptop. Fuck it. And nobody bought it. And then in 2009, Steve Jobs stood up, and when he launched the iPad, he put up a slide with the MacBook on one side, the iPhone on the other, and his words were, and I'm paraphrasing, but he uses the word category. He says, we believe there's room for a third category of device, and let me tell you why. And then what he does is he shares with you a point of view about why that's the case. He frames a new kind of problem. So in this case, he talks about the ability to consume content in an unbelievably awesome way and to communicate in an unbelievably awesome way. So he says there's a content consumption and communication problem, which he talks about, and then ta-da, the iPad solves that problem. And then what happens? When the world accepts his point of view that there should be a third device that's predicated on solving a problem that you and I hadn't thought about, and then we see the solution, we go, wow, that's fucking awesome. People literally around the world stand up in line, and Microsoft sits there and goes, well, shit, we had the technology innovation years ago on this thing, and it didn't go, and everybody scratches their head, and they go, oh, must just have been timing. Well, timing matters, but if you don't educate the world, if you don't get the world to come to your point of view, then they're not going to get the aha around why you built the innovation anyway. And that's the difference between a legendary category designer and not. And the irony with Microsoft is Gates and the early crew understood this, but somehow over time, they thought they could win with just products as opposed to getting the category, the product, and the company and business model right.
This is why I say you make my life difficult, because if one doesn't think exactly like this today, that then I'm just gyrating. I'm just kind of going sideways. I mean, it's like one of those things. And I've seen this way of thinking described in other ways, but you guys do a really fantastic job of just like with a laser-like focus saying, this is the world today. If you want to be successful, if you want to be legendary, this is what you got to do. And you're really challenging all of us to say, and if you don't believe us, then give us a better option than this.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying that category design is the cure for all the ills mankind or humankind, but what we are saying is, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, the odds are stacked against all of us. And so we think it's incumbent upon us to say, okay, well, how do we increase the odds? And the way that myself and my partners who wrote the book think about this is, well, let's start by studying the legendary innovators over time. And what did they do different? And what we discovered is they have an intuition about the market. I'll give you another example we love. We think Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce.com, is one of the greatest category designers ever. For the better part of almost 20 years now, certainly over 15, he's been screaming, no software. And what he did with that simple phrase was begin to frame a problem about the way traditional enterprise application software, in his case, customer relationship management and sales software, the way it was installed, how shitty the usage was of it, and therefore the lack of results that it produced. And he said, there's a new way of delivering software called the cloud, and if you do it this way, the results are going to be materially different. And he evangelized the cloud, and he screamed, no software, and he still to this day screams no software. Well, by doing that, in the beginning, it sounds insane. Everybody thought he was going to fail. He said, well, you're going to get corporate CIOs to allow sales and forecast and customer data to live on your servers in a data center they've never been to? I don't fucking think so. And now, there isn't a CIO in the world that would think about installing, quote unquote, on-premise application software. And so what's my point? If Benioff had just evangelized the features of his new product, he never would have unseated Siebel in the beginning, and even more importantly, he never would have almost single-handedly created this whole new computing paradigm that we all enjoy today. By continuously screaming no software, and evangelizing the problem with traditional enterprise application software, over time, the world went, you know what? Maybe he's right. Maybe there is a different way to do this. And the collective light bulb went on, and all of a sudden, he drove the market from the way it was, application software installed on servers, to the way it now is, which is we get everything from the cloud. And that's what legendary innovators do. And so my point is it going to work every time? Of course not. Is there luck involved? Of course there is. Is there all sorts of magic pixie dust? Sure. But what we do know is when you study the legends, you see patterns. And specifically, you see patterns in how they address the market. And they take a very different approach to teaching the world to think as opposed to screaming products and features and technology.
I love a great quote that I want to pull from your work. Brian Roberts, quote, "Part of being a category king is having the courage to be non-consensus. Category kings have no model. If you're using a model you've seen elsewhere, you are de facto following," end quote. Man, that just, again, you can say this in multiple different ways, but it just smacks you upside the head if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business person, because you really have to decide early on in life or later on in life, well, I'm going to try and leave something behind when I'm gone, or I'm just going to be an average bloke doing average stuff.
Ultimately, you're going to build a company that's a follower, and if you're in the tech business, you're probably going to fail. You know, one of the other things that Brian has said to us, he's a legendary healthcare technology investor, Brian Roberts, and he says, things go from non-consensus to consensus fast. So if you think about an example we could all relate to, Airbnb. You can imagine when these kids show up on Sand Hill Road, where all the venture capitalists are in Silicon Valley, and say, we want to start a business that allows people to rent their fucking couches so people could stay in their house online. Most VCs looked at it and said, are you mental? This is the dumbest idea I ever heard. Who's going to want to do this? And what about all the security risks? And a million problems, right? And then all of a sudden, as they begin to make the model work and they educate the world, you and I, that there's a whole new way of thinking about travel and hospitality. And they have a tagline now. I might get it a little wrong, Mike, but it's something like, don't visit, stay there. It's like when you're at an Airbnb, you're in Paris. You're not just visiting Paris. That's the concept behind their point of view, right? And of course, today it's been one of the fastest, what's called time to market cap companies ever created. The speed with which they've grown in value. And so I think that's what Brian means when he says things go from non-consensus to consensus fast. If you teach the world to look at things the way you do, and the world gets it, then they will literally suck the solution, if you will, out of the company. And that's how you get an Airbnb or a Salesforce.com.
Contrast Airbnb to Uber and talk about the contrast in terms of disruption. I don't prefer to use Airbnb. I still prefer to stay, in an Intercon or a Shangri-La, something that I know. I don't want to take any gambles. I don't want to mess around with anything. I don't care if I have to pay a little more, whatever. So maybe Airbnb is not as disruptive, but compare that to perhaps Uber and talk about that disruption versus not disruption.
Yeah, so this is a very important topic to us. We don't mean to piss anyone off with what I'm about to share with you. But we think the word disruption is actually a mistake for our industry. And I'll tell you why. When you go and analyze the legendary entrepreneurs and innovators, most of them didn't start off by saying, we want to disrupt something. Elvis didn't disrupt jazz. He created rock and roll. And you can love jazz and rock and roll. Airbnb didn't disrupt the hotel industry, certainly not in the beginning. It might be a little bit. Uber, if you believe the story of their founding, they didn't start off by saying, we want to disrupt yellow cab or limos or buses. They said they experienced a problem. We're standing there in Paris. It's freaking raining, and I can't get a cab. I got this incredible supercomputer in my hand. Wouldn't it be cool if I could press a button and a car would come get me? The reality is the vast majority of legendary innovators were focused on creating something new and bringing it to the world. And in some cases, there's disruption, and in some cases, there's not. Another one of our legendary category designers that we love is Les Paul. Les Paul is the creator of the electric guitar. Les didn't destroy the acoustic guitar. He created a new category of guitar, and now they sit together. Sometimes disruption happens, and sometimes it doesn't. But the point being, Mike, disruption, if it happens, is a function of creation. And the other interesting thing, legendary category kings build ecosystems that ultimately become industries, with them sitting at the center of it. Well, if you're, I'll just pick one out of the hat. If you're in the insurance industry and you say, we're going to disrupt the insurance industry, everybody else in the insurance industry goes, oh yeah? Fuck you, right? And they do everything possible to stop you. But if you say, we've created a new paradigm in the insurance industry that we think is going to make a difference for everyone, then maybe people are going to listen to you. And so it may sound subtle to some, but what we believe is the legendary entrepreneurs have shown us it's about creation. And sometimes disruption happens, and sometimes just a whole new thing is there.
Let's talk about pricing. And I want to go back to Apple because it's such a clear example. We can talk about the iPad, we can talk about the iPhone. If one comes up with this fresh, this novel, this new category, this category killer, pricing, I mean, look, so many people spend their life, whether they're buying or selling, worried about the lowest damn price. How are you supposed to get rich if you charge nothing? And the category kings seemingly don't worry about this because they know if they release something that's novel, fresh, different, they're going to get paid and they charge accordingly. Talk about pricing.
So the category king has massive pricing power. As the category develops, their pricing power and, frankly, their margins go up. If you're the category designer, you get to decide what the price point is. I'll give you a simple example. Every category is designed, and somebody designed it. You can go into a Costco, a Walmart, any big box store, and you can buy a very sophisticated, decent-sized flat-screen TV for about $150 in America today. And if you want to buy a pair of high-end sunglasses, like a pair of Maui Jims, they're between $250 and $300 and something dollars. And if you take a step back, you say, well, wait a minute. How the fuck did that turn out that way? How come I have this one piece of technology that is a marvel of human engineering that talks to satellites in space, and I have another one that, yes, is a wonderful product and blocks UV rays, and I have blue eyes, and so I need a good pair of sunglasses. But on its face, wouldn't you think that you would pay a lot more for the TV than you would the sunglasses? And the reason you don't is in category design, when a new category emerges and the price gets set, it leverages a thing that a lot of researchers around the human brain call the anchor effect. And the anchor effect is when you and I as human beings for the first time hear about something new, the things that we hear about that something new for that first time anchor our thinking about it. In a business discussion, by way of example, if you're talking about buying a new piece of machinery for your company, and somebody says, well, these carboningulators start at $100,000, that anchors the value that you associate with it. If they say these things start at $20,000, then that anchors you to a different place. And that's how 5-hour energy can be, 5 or 6 times, I forget the exact number, per ounce than Coke. That's how, if you ever tried the Listerine breast strips, those things are like 3x the price of gum, maybe more. Because when you create a new category, you get to decide. Because you're establishing in the mind of the customer, A, how they should think about the problem. And what we know is the bigger the problem, the more urgent the problem, the more people will spend solving that problem. and then B, the value of the solution in the context of the problem. And so in the case of 5 Hour Energy, they say, hey, when I'm tired, I'm not thirsty. So I don't want to have this big energy drink. Maybe I don't want to have this coffee. I do this quick little whoop and perk back up again. And the minute you get that, and they say, hey, you know what? And as a result, that problem called perking myself up without filling myself up is worth a lot more than your average energy drink. And in this case, the world bought it, and ta-da, you have a roughly $2 billion category in the U.S., and Living Essentials is a private company, but a best guess is they have about 90% of that category.
As you're saying that, I'm looking at the title of your book, and I'm looking at the subtitle, and there's the one word that jumps out. What does the word pirate have to do with any of this from your perspective?
Look, pirates have always had big balls and always been swashbuckling, and there's a component of storm the castle, there's a component of burn the boats, and there's certainly a component of swagger. It takes, to your point earlier, Mike, on balls, it takes a lot of swagger. Elon Musk is out there right now telling the world that Tesla's success is important for the human race. You may or may not agree with him, but that takes a whole lot of swagger. When Steve Jobs says he's going to do what he's going to do, and all these legendary entrepreneurs, when Clarence Birdseye creates frozen food, he's got to convince the grocery stores to carry it and to build new fridges. He's got to convince the railways to have new railway fridge cars. He's got to convince DuPont to commercialize cellophane so he can wrap the shit up. And then, of course, he's got to go to you and I as consumers and educate us about distinguishing between fresh food, canned food, and now this new category at the time, in the 1920s, if my memory is correct, frozen food, right? And so he goes out and he makes all of that happen. And that's what it takes.
Let's talk about the individual, the leaders of the category kings. I'm thinking about so many of these personalities. For example, obviously Google's had untold success, but if you put the two main Google guys on stage, I mean, yes, the diehards are going to sit there and listen and take notes, but you're not walking away electrified. Musk is electrifying people. Jobs electrified people. Freaking Colonel Sanders electrified people. I don't think Bill Gates electrifies people. Ballmer, obviously immensely successful, and he's got that one famous video where he goes crazy on stage, but I don't know if that's really the electrification you're talking about. So what is it about, though, these people that we can really immediately think of electricity? What are they bringing to the table that resonates so well with investors, the VC community, audiences? What are they doing? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. So the first thing I'd share with you, Mike, is the style of the leader is much less the issue. If you're dorky or you're soft-spoken or whatever you are, the people that come to mind, of course, are the hugely charismatic folks. You don't necessarily have to be that way to make this work. What you do have to get, however, is that the E in CEO stands for evangelist. The only way you're going to be a category king is if you prosecute the magic triangle: company, product, and category. And as it relates to the category, when you get into the category building phase and you're really trying to create this new market, the CEO needs to spend at a minimum 50% of her time in the world evangelizing, and I'm going to use this phrase very much on purpose, Mike, a point of view. And that point of view needs to be different than what came before. And the purpose of that point of view is to articulate a problem that either A, we didn't know we had, or B, we didn't think could be solved or solved in that way. And so you get people to pay attention to the thing you want them to care about. And the minute they think about the problem in the way you want them to think about it, naturally, they're going to want the solution. And because of the way the human brain works, and in particular the anchor effect, the first company that educates me about the problem, I assume has the solution. And once I acknowledge that I want to solve that problem, bang, that's where Facebook happens. whether you're a naturally charismatic leader and you're this incredible persona on stage the way as Steve Jobs was, that's less of the issue. What the real issue is, does the CEO in particular understand that she needs to spend this time evangelizing? And can she take her vision for the category and articulate it in a point of view the way Benioff did with No Software that resonates with the world? And if it does, then they're going to be successful. But there's no way you can do this sitting in your office. The CEO's got to get out in front and be the evangelist and use a powerful and provocative point of view to get the world to understand what they want them to understand.
Use Pixar as an example. What was the problem? Talk about the evangelist of Pixar, because it really wasn't Jobs. It was Lasseter, right?
Yeah, well, the fascinating thing about Pixar, of course, is Pixar starts off life as a computer company. And so the vision in the beginning is movies are going to be animated. Movie studios are going to want, they're going to be digitally animated with computers. So we're going to shift from to, and this is something we talk a lot about in our work and in our book, this thing called from to, or Frodo's for short. So the vision in the beginning was we're going to sell computers to animators who make movies, because the way the world's going to go is it's going to go from drawing them to digital animation. And Pixar is a miserable failure. In the beginning, they create a movie to show what's possible with the new technology. The animation companies still don't get it. There's an interesting side note, which is a lot of the legendary category design is done by people outside of that industry, but we can talk about that if you want. So they create this short, I forget the name of it now.
I remember that little commercial with like the lamp on the desk.
Yes, that was it. And the purpose of that was actually to educate the rest of the industry. Hey, this is how you should make movies. The industry said, no, I'm not listening. And so they said, okay, well, fuck you. We're going to go make our own movies. We believe so powerfully in this Frodo, in this vision that digital animation is the future. We're just going to do it ourselves.
You just threw Disney under the bus.
Yeah, I did. And because so many legendary companies, and Disney is one of the most, of course, legendary companies in the world. Walt Disney is a personal hero of mine. However, they get drunk and stoned on the profits of their existing category king positions, and they have an inability to understand where they can prosecute the new magic triangle going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and they ended up, of course, I think if people don't follow this, Disney now owns Pixar, don't they?
They sure do.
They probably had to pay a little more now, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. And I believe, I could be wrong, but there was a moment in time where Steve Jobs was the largest shareholder in Disney. And I think that was true when he died, but I'm not positive. And so actually Disney, I'll take them out from under the bus. They did what legendary companies do when a new category emerges. It takes off. A king is crowned. They bought the category king. If they had bought, I don't even know who Pixar's competitors were at that time, but if they bought a competitor, because a lot of people say, oh, shit, why would we pay all this money for the category king? This competitor has the same capabilities and they're a lot cheaper. And we'll just beat them on price, or we'll beat them on features, which is normally what people think. We'll beat them on distribution, something else. And that rarely, if ever, works, because once a category king's in place, they're almost impossible to unseat. And so Disney did the incredibly wise thing, which is they bought the category king. And so now they're the category king in digital animation.
Let's talk about acceleration, velocity. As time rolls forward, the acceleration, the velocity of these new category kings, you can get from 0 to 60 really quick if you do it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the big thing that's changed. About 10 years ago, there was a seminal book written in Silicon Valley called The Lean Startup. And the concept was that, today with the cloud and agile development methodologies and mobile computing, social computing, essentially what you had was, and our friend Mike Maples, the co-founder of Floodgate Capital, 10 years ago, his kind of mantra was 500,000 is the new 5 million. And so my point is, what happened as we exited the 1990s and into the 2000s was the cost of building a technology startup in particular, and really many startups overall, plummeted because technology made it a lot easier to build new products and take them to market. And then when you took them to market, social and the internet and so forth allowed a virality, whether it was for the product itself in the case of software, whether it was just spreading the word digitally and socially. And so the reality is the ability to create new shit and new companies, the barriers to entry have gotten a lot lower. But as Mike says, when the barriers of entry are low, guess what? You have way more competitors.
I want to quote something from your work from Mike Maples, and he refers to it. I guess it's the same thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the category king, he's kind of calling it a thunder lizard. And he says thunder lizards are rare. In a given year, there are 10,000 startups that get funded by angels. 1,500 get a Series A funding. 80 companies will likely do well, but only 12 will be a thunder lizard.
Yeah, and his term thunder lizard is essentially interchangeable with the notion of category king. And the reason for that is this ability to build a company and category and product much more quickly than you could in the past, and B, because of, in particular, the ability to communicate today and the virality of all of that, when a company hits that magic tipping point, they can scale much more rapidly than ever before. And so a company you never heard of becomes Uber, a household name, in what feels like to most of us, a matter of a year or two. That's what's going on. And, Tim Cook at the last big Apple conference announced that there were over 2 million apps on the Apple App Store. How are you going to compete in this world where there's so much new innovation? There's so many new products and features. Well, guess what? The vast majority of those entrepreneurs are going to focus on 2 things, product and company. And they're going to hope the world figures it out. And the legendary entrepreneurs are going to focus on 3 things. And they're going to teach the world why this is a new category, why this problem matters, and therefore why the solution matters.
You mentioned earlier in this conversation the ecosystem that could form around a category king, and all those apps, there's your ecosystem right there.
Yeah, I mean, the Apple iStore is probably the greatest example in technology today. And the irony about that, this is so incredible, is nobody understood this better than Gates and Microsoft in the beginning. They built the greatest ecosystem at that time. They crushed companies like Novell, who were the original innovator in the networking space, because of the power of their ecosystem, at least in part. And so they understood that category kings create these partnerships that ultimately put themselves at the center of a whole new market category, a whole new universe. And yet somehow they've been unable to do that on an ongoing basis in new categories.
You talk about him in your work some, a very famous title, The Innovator's Dilemma from Clayton Christensen. I remember reading it back during the dot-com bubble days. Talk about what he got right and what he got wrong, or did he get anything wrong?
He's a genius. We aspire to, make 1% the difference that a guy like Clayton made with this book. And so he got a ton of stuff right. And he got people to think about innovation in a way that really people hadn't thought of before. It was a landmark book, and most people in business today, of course, continue to read it. The part that's missing is he talks about it in the context of more technology, products, and features. And there is a missing conversation called products and companies exist in the world. And for the world to understand them and ultimately accept them, the world files them into these buckets in our brain. You and I as human beings need a way to file things, to tag things in our head so that we understand them. Simple example is, I have to think muscle cars are cool before I start wondering, should I test drive a Corvette or a Mustang or a Camaro? The Innovator's Dilemma doesn't really address how the innovations, the quote-unquote disruptive innovations, are going to live in the world. And where they live in the world is they create the market. So said in maybe a simpler way, Mike, he talks about how you disrupt an existing market from more or less a product and innovation perspective. What we're talking about here is how you take that product or innovation and how you create an equally innovative place for it in the world, and that place is called a new category. And if that new category takes off, it becomes a giant new market. And what we know is the company that designs the space is best positioned to dominate it.
You quote, this is from one of your co-authors, Dave, and I love this sentence. It's kind of like what you guys are calling the Dave's 3 questions. And we don't need to go through all 3 right now, but the first one I just love, which is, can you explain to me, like a 5-year-old, what problem you're trying to solve? Boy, here we having this detailed conversation about startups, technology, software, Silicon Valley. And then you guys are saying, but it's got to be explained in a way that a 5-year-old can get it.
Absolutely. And it's interesting if we have this conversation with founders and entrepreneurs and CEOs all the time. What problem do you solve? And if you ask a room full of executives from the same company that question, pour yourself a beer and sit back and let them roll. There's going to be a very long conversation. And very rarely does anybody say, no software. That's the problem we solve. In the beginning, and it's interesting, framing the problem becomes so important. TiVo was the original innovator of the DVR space. They ultimately lost it. We could talk about why if you want. But what made the DVR take off was they articulated a problem that you and I didn't know we had. And that problem they called appointment viewing. And at the time, the number 1 TV show in the U.S. was called Friends. And they said, why the fuck do you have to wait to 8 o'clock on Thursday to watch Friends? Appointment viewing sucks. You should be able to watch what you want, when you want. And what made TiVo and the DVR category that now DirecTV and Comcast and so forth have kind of, taken over, but what made that category take off was this concept of the problem being framed as appointment viewing. And if you can make appointment viewing a cigarette, then your category takes off. And that's exactly what they did. And it was genius. And so my point is, when the world resonates powerfully with the problem, that's what makes this whole thing go.
I can think back to the early 1990s. You had to watch Seinfeld on a Thursday night at 9 p.m., I believe. And today, someone told me, or in the last month or two, they said, hey, watch this TV show Billions on Showtime. I downloaded every episode and watched them 12 episodes back to back to back. And that's in a very relatively short period of time, 20 years or so, to completely change how the process unfolds.
That's exactly right. The one other thing I'll say about the creation of the DVR space that's really incredible is TiVo did not say we're a VCR 2.0. They didn't say we're a better VCR. They said we're something different. The VCR is the old way. We're the new way. And let me tell you why. And then they evangelized the problem, appointment viewing. And they did not, it's the same thing Zuckerberg did. Zuckerberg did not say Facebook it's kind of like email, but way better. That's not what he said.
And, look, what's really interesting, too, is when you think back to this, Blockbuster, who was the leader. I mean, you had to go to that damn Blockbuster store. They could not parlay that into anything. They just closed all the stores. All that experience they have with customers and media and entertainment, and they could do nothing with it. They could not pivot. And maybe it's just impossible to pivot when you're that wedded to one particular way.
Well, and the interesting thing about them, most people in a, if you will, innovator's dilemma context, when talking about Blockbuster, which is a great example, Mike, they would say, oh, well, their problem was they failed to innovate. Well, when you say that, the unspoken is they failed to get new products and technology and features. They didn't get that the internet was going to be the new delivery feature. Well, that's not what their problem was. Their problem was Reed Hastings made their market go away. He drove them from them to a new paradigm by evangelizing a problem. And you kind of touched on the problem, which is don't drive to a fucking video store only to discover they don't have what you want anyway.
We all did this for years.
I know. And then there's the sweaty kid with the zits behind the thing. And he's like, oh, we don't have that, but like maybe this. And then your wife's standing there and she goes, I don't want to watch that.
And then you got to return the damn thing.
Right. And Reed says, hey, he doesn't say, I'm competing with them. He said, there's a different, and I use that word very much on purpose, way to do this. Go to a website, tell us all the movies you love, and they're going to show up in your mailbox. And he shifted using from twos, we call them Frodos for short, the world from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. And I'll give you another example. I love this. I was at a wedding on the weekend in Boston. The bride had a couple of these Fuji cameras that are like the old Polaroid. So you take the picture and they puke out what we used to call a Polaroid, right? There's the photo. And that's what they did. And so people were having fun taking these old school photos. The young people, the teenagers who were there, they'd never seen it before. And so my point is that the shift from twos that have happened in the photography space is absolutely mind-blowing, so much so that in a generation, you have teenagers who haven't ever even seen a camera that you take a picture and it spits out a photo, a physical photo. And that's how powerful it is. And in hindsight, I think this goes back to the Brian Roberts quote about things go from non-consensus to consensus fast. In hindsight, digital photography or Netflix or the DVR or Salesforce.com or any of these that you want to talk about seems like a no-shit Sherlock. Well, of course it was just going to go from driving to the video store to doing it digitally over the internet. Yeah, well, not really. In the beginning, hard, right? Real hard. Reed had a hard time getting the company funded and took a long, all the things that entrepreneurs have to go through. Today it looks like, well, of course. The point being, category design is about making that, of course, happen. When it looks like it was smart in hindsight, that's because somebody got product, company, and category right. Or the way we say it, Mike, is every product or service that you and I love exists because an entrepreneur and innovator designed a product, a company, and a category at the same time.
Let me wind you down. I can't keep you all day. I could keep just plugging you with questions. And I've got like 6 pages of notes in front of me, and on most of this, I'm just kind of dreaming up out of my own whatever. Let's talk about. I mentioned to you that I'm currently calling you from Asia. Let's broaden this out because we could easily have a very Western view of things. From your experience, is there any change? Is there any difference at how these things unfold once you go to, for example, China, a much larger market than the U.S.? Clearly, they're adopting digital everything as fast as they possibly can. They love paying tons of money for anything that is of the designer brands and all that. So talk about China or perhaps any of your experience outside of the States in terms of category kings.
So what we have found, Mike, is that the category king dynamic plays out over and over and over again. It's not geographically bound. There's no distinction between how this works in the U.S. and how it works in Asia or Europe or anywhere else. There tends to be some different kinds of technologies that show up in different parts of the world. A category that works in one part of the world may not go in another part of the world. That can also happen. But the concept that if you have a breakthrough innovation that is meaningfully different, a meaningful step forward, that you have to be able to articulate to the world why it's different and why that difference matters. And if you do that, you have an opportunity to become the category king. And if you don't, you're more than likely to be used. Those concepts play no matter where you are in the world. And they're really, the bottom line is there really is no difference.
I have to share with you, I had a conversation with an individual recently. I'd like to have this person on my show. And this conversation was in Saigon, Vietnam. This person had, in 2003, 2004, before Facebook had really penetrated, they launched the first multiplayer game portal online in Vietnam. Now, mind you, at this time, this is a country of 90 million people. At that time, probably 50% were under the age of 25. They launched this thing. And this person looked at me and said, on day one, we had 10 million users.
Yeah.
There's your just feeding the beast.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So if you talk about countries that are less technologically developed than say the US or Europe or quote unquote, or the Western world, whatever that means today, the same level of category design is required. So for example, if a big topic in technology, particularly around mobile, is how do we bank the unbanked? there's billions of people in the world that don't have a bank account, don't have credit, and they want to be able to have some of the benefits of that we've enjoyed for a long time. And so there's been this massive movement for several years now to turn a smartphone, or even not a smartphone, that's the interesting part, a modified feature phone, and turn it into a digital wallet and educate people about what credit is and how that works and so forth. We recently had the chance to talk to some company called Lendo that's trying to bring lending practices to the developing world using mobile devices and using their interconnectedness digitally in their community to sort of validate their ability to pay back loans. It's a wild and wonderful concept and a big innovation. But the point being, imagine you're trying to teach people, A, about mobile technology, B, mobile technology can be turned into a bank, essentially, C, what lending is and how it works and how credit works and so forth, and then getting them to embrace all that stuff as a new paradigm for living their lives, right? The amount of category design that's required for that is much more than the amount of category design required to educate you and I that we can touch our smartphone and get an Uber. And so I guess my point is, in many parts of the developing world, the ability to get product, company, and category design right is even more important because the leap you're asking people to make is even bigger. And I think I might have said it earlier, but the bigger the innovation, the more the market education.
Fascinating topics. The book, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Why don't you give a one-line bio shout out, because you've got 3 other, quote, co-authors on this book.
So what do you mean by a bio?
Well, I mean, do you want to go ahead and give, I'm not familiar with, I'm familiar with you now because we've just spoke for an hour, but I know you've got Al, you got Dave, Kevin. Maybe you want to kind of just give a brief shout to their backgrounds and kind of how they are, how this came to be kind of the four-man book.
This may sound like a corny thing to say, but those are 3 guys I love. I consider them brothers in life. So Al Ramadan, he's one of the co-founders of Play Bigger Advisors, which is our company, and obviously a co-author of the book. He's originally from Australia. He's got a computer science background. He's a former entrepreneur. He's an extreme sports enthusiast. He was on a America's Cup sailing team for Australia. A legendary entrepreneur. He was the first guy to put the Olympics on the internet. He founded a company called Quokka Sports in the 1990s that was bringing digital technology to sports. It was incredibly innovative, and although the company was a victim of the dot-com bust, much of the vision for bringing data and sports together is what we enjoy today. So that's Al. Dave Peterson, he and I have been friends for the better part of 20 years. He's considered a marketing legend in Silicon Valley. Started his first company very early, and his big entrepreneurial claim to fame, he founded a company called Give Me Talk. And Give Me Talk was the inventor of the podcast space. At the time, they called it Internet Talk Radio. Just like Quokka, he was absolutely right, but he was about 15 years early. But he's gone on to be a legendary CMO, and of course, he's a co-founder of Play Bigger, the company, and a co-author of the book, and today is a coach in this regard. And then Kevin Maney is arguably one of the 10 best writers in the technology space. He's the tech columnist for Newsweek, and he's written many books. He's probably most famous for writing the book about Watson Jr., who really created IBM. IBM considers Kevin, if not certainly one of the leading historians on IBM. And so those are the 3 guys, and the 2 that are in the business with me, this work in Silicon Valley. It's interesting, Mike, because when we were working on the book proposal, a lot of top-tier publishers said, we're not doing this because we don't understand. 4 guys can't write a book. This is crazy. And it turns out the whole book universe is focused on 1 or maybe 2 authors. The concept of 4 is ridiculous. And we just looked at it and said, well, this is how software developers write code, and this is how legendary bands write records and songs. So why is it so crazy to think 4 people couldn't write a book? And that's what we did. And I can tell you, the writing process with the 3 of them was the most fun and most rewarding project I've ever worked on in business. And the result of it, whether we sell 1 copy or 100 million copies, is the thing I'm most proud of in my career. And the fact that the four of us were able to come together and do a true collaboration on this book and have four guys produce a result that we're so proud of is something I think is really special.
Look, if people are still alive, if they have a pulse, if they want to have any entrepreneurial success, I challenge someone to read this book and say they wasted their money. I don't see how that happens.
Well, Mike, I'm stoked you feel that way. It's interesting. As we were working on the book, we thought a lot about, of course, what we wanted to say and how we wanted to say it and so forth and so on. And we got a lot of feedback. We should do this. We should do that. We're living in a world of 140 characters. Nobody reads any books anymore. Maybe we should just make the thing a whole bunch of fucking emojis and infographics and fucking I don't know what. And we just decided, fuck that. We're going to write the book that we think needs to be written by us. Hopefully people will get it. We'll do some category design on the world to help them get it, of course. And if it goes, it goes. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But this concept of category design enabling category kings has kind of been a secret black art in Silicon Valley that's really been done by a small group of people and done by a lot of other people in a very sort of intuitive way and not really knowing what they were doing. And now we put it on the table. So far the response has been great. We found out today we made our first bestseller list. We're 3 weeks into the launch of the book, so we're very proud of that. But anyway, all that said, the four of us working together on this book, and I think I can speak for the other three guys, it was the greatest single project we ever worked on. And Kevin Maney, the writing genius, said it's the first book he ever wrote that when it was finished, he was sad it was finished.
Well, it's always nice because, look, it's all about legacy. We all want to imagine 100 years into the future when one of these kids that have got, emojis tattooed on their forehead and is taking selfies all day long will look back at some search mechanism and find some piece of writing or some thought that we put together where they have that aha moment and go, damn, they saw that really early.
And I really relate to that, Mike. I got thrown out of school when I was 18 for being stupid. I found out when I was 21.
Was there a test for that when you say you were thrown out for being stupid?
Yeah, there was a test. It was called every fucking class I ever took, and most of them were D's and F's. And so by the time I was 18, I just, I couldn't continue and ended up starting my first company shortly thereafter. But at 21, I discovered I was dyslexic. When I started in business, because I had no experience, I had no education. I come from a very modest working class background. Nobody I knew had really done anything in business. The only ways I could sort of learn were A, to do it, B, to seek out mentors, and C, to read. And there's a handful of books back then. I'm happy to share with you the ones that made the biggest difference, but because of my lack of education, experience, connection, everything, I had to read. And being a dyslexic, it was hard to read, but I did it. And those books made a huge difference. And a dear friend of ours, her name's Peggy Burke. She runs what we believe is the greatest branding and design agency in Silicon Valley called 1185 Design. She came to us about 2 years ago and said, look, boys, you just have to write this book. And I said, Peggy, we don't write a book. Fuck, it's hard. And who wants to do that? And I'm not really sure that, we have enough to say here and blah, blah, blah. And she said, listen, she had known this about me because we're good friends. She said, what would have happened to you, Christopher, if David Ogilvy hadn't written Ogilvy on Advertising? What would have happened to you in your life if Jeffrey Moore hadn't written Crossing the Chasm? What would have happened if Reese and Trout hadn't written Positioning and Marketing Warfare and those books, and many others, Michael Gerber, The E-Myth, and so many great business books, and of course later on, Innovator's Dilemma, and many others. And I read all those books, but particularly as a young man. And I thought about David Ogilvy in particular. He wrote Ogilvy on Advertising when he was running arguably the hottest ad agency in the world. And I'm sure he didn't have time, and I'm sure it was a pain in the ass, but he did it anyway. What Peggy said to me is, look, if you can make a difference that is a minuscule fraction of the level of those people, then you should. And she thought we could. That spoke to me. And that was really the motivation. And then to do it as a collaboration with three guys who I think are some of the smartest guys in the world and who I love being around. And we had a lot of fun writing this book, and we knocked down a lot of IPAs. And that was really our motivation. And so you're right in terms of legacy. It wasn't what we started off, when we started Play Bigger. It wasn't It wasn't on the agenda at all. We got convinced that we might be able to make a difference, and so we're trying to stand on the shoulder of some of those giants who came before.
Chris, I thank you for taking the time today. Been a fun conversation, and if there does happen to be a book number 2, please drop me an email so we can have another conversation.
We'd love to, Mike. You've been incredibly kind, and I appreciate you speaking to me from you're in beautiful Vietnam. Is that right? That's right?
Yeah. Well, listen, take care, sir.
You too, and hey, play bigger.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.